Okay, welcome back to another video on the Maths channel. It's your teacher, Mr. Lim here, and in this video we are going to be looking at reciprocal trig functions and their graphs. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to define the reciprocal trig functions and sketch the graphs in both radians and degrees. So let's have a look at the first part of today's lesson. What are the three reciprocal trig functions? So the first one is cosec theta, which is equal to, or cosecant theta, which is equal to 1 on sine theta, where sine of theta cannot equal to 0 because we can't divide by 0. The second one is secant of theta is equal to 1 on cosine of theta, where cosine of theta cannot equal to 0. And cot theta, which is, or cotangent of theta, which is equal to 1 on tan theta, which is equal to cos theta on sine theta, where sine theta cannot equal to 0, or tan theta cannot equal to 0. Now, how do we memorize this? How do we know which reciprocal trig function goes with which other trig function? The trick is to look for the third letter of each. The third letter of each of these tells you what they pair up with. So, the third letter of cosecant is S, so that pairs with sine. The letter of secant is C, so that pairs with cos, or cosine. And the third letter of T, of cot, is T, so that pairs with tan. Okay, so these are the three reciprocal trig functions. What do they look like? Let's have a look at the first one, y equals to the cosecant x. A table of values for y equals sine x would include these. So if we were to have sine of 0, that's equal to 0. Or sine of 45 degrees, in our calculator it rounds to about 0.71. If we were to do sine of pi on 2 in radians mode, our calculator will give us an answer of 1, or 90 degrees in degrees mode. Okay? So when we graph this out, it would look something like this. Seven one's probably about there. 90. Okay, so this is the sine curve. Okay, so green is sine x. But if cosecant of x is equal to 1 on sine of x, then the table of values for this would look like, what we're going to do is we're going to take this and put 1 over that. 1 divided by that. Well, we can't do 1 divided by 0. So actually, this is undefined. In fact, all of these, where sine of x is 0, will give us an undefined answer. Okay, let's use our calculator to work out some of the other values. If we were to take 1 and divide it by 0.71, because remember, sine of x is in the denominator, and this is sine of x. So if we were to take 1 and divide it by 0.71, we will get about 1.4. So all of the ones that say 0.71 will be 1.4. This one will be negative 1.4. Okay. 1 divided by 1 is just 1. And therefore this one is negative 1. And so when we graph this, wherever it says it's undefined, there has to be an asymptote there. A vertical asymptote. Okay, it's not going to cross that line. or 180, or 360. Okay, so those are our vertical asymptotes. At 45 degrees, it's going to be about 1.4. 1.4 is probably about there. 90 degrees, 135 degrees is 1.4. If we had more values to input, it's going to form a nice U shape. Okay? And it's never going to cross these asymptotes. Let's move on. 225 degrees, or 5 pi and 4, is negative 1.4, which is probably around here. 270 degrees is minus 1. 315 minus 1.4. And again, if we had more points to plot, it will form a nice curve, a nice U. Okay, so this is the graph of y equals cosecant of x for one period, or one cycle, which is 2 pi. So I'm just going to label that y is equal to cosecant x. Okay, let's have a look at the second one, y equals secant x. So the table of values for y equals cos x would, or cosine of x would include this. But because secant x is equal to 1 on cosine x, we're just going to take these values and divide it and do 1 divided by that. Okay, 1 divided by cosine of x at 0 degrees is 1. So 1 divided by 1 is just 1. 1 divided by 0.71, we worked that out before as 1.4. 1 on 0, we can't divide by 0, it's undefined. Are there any other zeros? Yes, there are. So there's going to be at asymptotes at 90 degrees and 270 degrees, or at pi on 2 and at 3 pi on 2. 135 degrees will be negative 1.4. 1 divided by negative 1 is negative 1. 1 divided by negative 0.71 will be negative 1.4. This will be positive 1.4, and 1 divided by 1 is 1. So if we were to graph cosine of x, it would look something like this. But we want to sketch y equals secant x. I'll draw that in red. Let's put in our asymptotes. Our asymptotes are at 90 degrees and at 270 degrees. Remember, the graphs will always look the same whether it's in degrees or in radians. So if it were in radians, if the question were to ask you, draw it in radians, all you have to do is just change this 90 degrees to pi on 2, 180 to pi, 3 pi on 2, and 2 pi. Okay, it's exactly the same graph, just with different values for the x-axis. So here we got one. 45 degrees is 1.4, about there. So it's going to form something like that. Then 135 degrees is negative 1.4. 180 is negative 1. 225, again, negative 1.4. So it's going to look something like this. And 315 degrees is 1.4. on 360 degrees is 1. So it's going to be the other half of this bit. So if we had the negative angles, it'll probably look something like this. Okay, and that's just this bit is exactly the same as this bit here. Okay. I'm going to label this graph y equals secant of x. Alright, let's have a look at the last one, y equals the cotangent of x. So a table of values for y equals cotangent of x would include, actually, this is my mistake, that should say tan 0, 1, undefined, minus 1, 0, 1, undefined, minus 1, 0. So we were to graph this, we will have vertical asymptotes at 90 degrees and 270. 0, 0, 45 degrees is 1. Okay, so it's going to look something like this. 135 minus 1, 180, 0, 1, and minus 1, 0. Okay, so that is y equals 10x. If we were to take 1 and divide it by 10x, we will get cotangent of x. 1 divided by 0, that's undefined. We can't divide by 0. So where else is it undefined? So we will have asymptotes there at 0, 180, and 360, or at 0, pi, and 2 pi. So I'll do that in blue. Okay. 1 divided by 1, that's 1. That means that's 1. That means this is negative 1. And this is negative 1. Now, what do we do when we have 1 divided by undefined? Well, the only reason why this is undefined is because it's something, let's just call it x, divided by 0. Well, if we were to flip that, if we were to find the reciprocal, it'll become 0 divided by that something, which is 0. And so wherever it's undefined for tan x, for cotangent x is going to be 0. So let's graph this. 45 degrees is 1. 90 degrees is 0. 135 is minus 1. So if we had more points to plot, it will form this curve right here. 225 is 1. 270, 0. 315 minus 1. And it's going to look exactly the same. Okay, and so I'm going to label that y equals cotangent x. Okay, so now you know how to define the reciprocal trig functions. Cosec or cosecant x is equal to 1 on sine x. Okay, secant x is equal to 1 on cosine x. And cotangent of x is equal to 1 on tangent x. And we memorize this by looking at the third letter of the reciprocal function to determine what it pairs with. And now you also know how to sketch the graphs of these reciprocal trig functions in both radians and degrees. And like I said, they are exactly the same graphs, whether it's in degrees or radians. Just make sure that your calculator is in the right mode. If you're using degrees, have it in degrees mode. If it's in radians, have it in radians mode. And that's it for this video.